There are so many people that we have to thank for open cinema. There's too many, actually, for me to mention. So I'm just going to say a very blanket thank you to the open cinema team that is growing. We couldn't do this without you. You are highly appreciated, and you all know who you are. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all of the volunteers who come month after month to open cinema events and who know their tasks so well that new event coordinators almost don't have to do anything. Well, Jay, that's a bit of an exaggeration wherever you are, Jay. But, you know, it makes a good story. But the volunteers truly are, thank you so much to each and every one of you for helping. And I also want to thank you for being here and to the online audience for joining us on Twitter, on Facebook, and watching the Ustream. So thanks for being part of this and sharing your thoughts. We really want your feedback. Here in the room, you have feedback forms. We welcome any feedback. What's working? What can we do better? What do you need? What do you want for next time? And we'd love to hear the same from you online. Our next event is April 14th, and we're screening a very powerful film called The Secret Trial 5. It's a fascinating and award-winning new Canadian documentary that brilliantly captures the tragic stories of 5 Muslim men who've been detained under the Canadian government's security certificates, which is an immigration process that allows for the indefinite jailing of non-citizens without charge. So stay tuned for that on April 14th. So now I'm going to throw, as the anchor of tonight's webcast, I'm going to throw it back to our political correspondent, Sebastian Silva, to introduce our panel and get into some further discussion about election fraud and fair elections and robocalls. So thank you, Sebastian. Big round of applause for Sebastian Silva.
All right, thank you, Mandy. So we are so fortunate tonight to have this panel of speakers. They all agreed to be here because they believe in what we're doing tonight, and I'm happy to introduce them. So our first panel member joins us from Vancouver, where on a daily basis, she stands up for the privacy rights of patients and British Columbians. She's a trained lawyer, a former adjunct professor from UBC, and the policy director of the BC Civil Liberties Association. She was also the recipient of the 2010 Accolades Award for Social and Political Advocacy, benefiting communities affected by HIV and AIDS. She's a frequent speaker on a variety of civil liberties topics, including privacy, and she's familiar with the information practices of political parties and their use of databases. Now, she is arguably a woman who can be trusted with secrets. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Micheal Vonn. Our second panel member has a PhD in geography and has taught environmental studies at the University of Victoria. She's well known for her columns on environmental issues, including In Focus, as well as a former broadcaster with Chum TV and her show, Environmental. She ran in the 2008 election as a federal candidate and for Saanich Gulf Islands, where she narrowly lost the election in which robocalls were used, a crime that remains unresolved to this day. Now, her most recent book, The Real Thing, is the first official autobiography of Ian McTaggart Cowan, who's known as the father of Canadian ecology. The Real Thing is available through Rocky Mountain Books, and it's set for release in May. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Briony Penn. Now, while most of us spend our time working in offices and boardrooms or outdoors, this man sits in the legislature, passionately following the old riveting debates that take place, looking for stories where others may have missed them. He is the Legislative Bureau Chief of the Tyee.ca. Now, his reporting has been featured in many magazines, including the Georgia Straight, Monday, Focus, the San Francisco Bay Guardian, and others. His writing has won him acclaims, awards, and a loyal following. As a journalist in the 2008 election, he was responsible for breaking news stories related to the robocall story and other election irregularities, which he may tell you about. Now, his book on income inequality with the working title, A Better Place on Earth, is set for release in April, so check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming panel member Andrew MacLeod. Our fourth and final panel member is a professor at the Department of Economics at Simon Fraser University, working at the intersection of economics and political science, which means she's passionate about the issues we're discussing today, and she can make her point using very complicated formulas. Her current research touches on a variety of topics, including statistical methods to detect election norm violations, the consequences of partisanship and ideology in politics, and Aboriginal land management. For her research on electoral fraud, which she co-authored with UBC professor Tom Cornwall, she received the Nora and Ted Sterling Prize in Support of Controversy in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming panel member Dr. Anke Kessler. I will now turn the mic over to each panel member to give us a 3 to 4 minute introduction to who they are and how they're connected to the issue. And then we will turn it over to you to ask questions, make comments, and to the people listening online as well. We've got a wonderful social media team at the back who will be fielding questions, and so I'll be looking to them to see if there are questions for the panelists as well. And over to you.
Thanks lots. So sometimes people say, what are civil liberties? And we say, they're about rights, the fundamental rights. And then someone will say, well, which are the fundamental rights? And we say, the ones you need for a functioning democracy. Those are the fundamental rights. We can argue about all kinds of social goods, but we need the architecture to have that discussion, and that's a functioning democracy. Hopefully better than that, more than functioning, a robust democracy. So all of the issues that we touch upon when we talk about voter ID, voter suppression, political partisan databases, etc., are the home of our heart. But what I thought I could contribute in this introductory comments are some thoughts about those databases. You heard them referenced in the film several times. Federal political party databases are regulated nowhere. If this were government information, of course, there would be a statute, it's called the Privacy Act, that would govern how that information could be collected, what it could be used for, your rights of correction and access to such information. If this were a business or an NGO or a society, they too would be governed even federally, certainly provincially, by different private sector legislation for privacy and access to information. The federal political parties are in an information lacuna in terms of regulation, which is why it's the Wild West. If you want some sense of what this looks like in terms of ramifications, the best book that I know of, while we're waiting for the film to come out, which will tell us everything else, is Susan Delacourt's Shopping for Votes. I can commend it to you. I learned many things about not what was happening in terms of the legislative landscape, but in terms of practice. And what we're hearing about testimony that MPs are essentially using their government positions, MPs of many parties using their government positions to take constituency information and parlay it into partisan databases, which are then subject to data analytics. As you know, we're in the big data revolution. And that those numbers games and those analytics are being used for some non-nefarious purposes and some purposes we should be deeply, deeply worried about. So the sense of what are the things that we could do right away to help the situation that we're in, which is one of plummeting citizen faith that our electoral process works. One of the things we could do immediately is call for federal political parties, like our provincial political parties, to be governed by privacy and access legislation. That would be one thing that we could do. And as Delacourt makes absolutely clear, and I got to concur with her, it certainly isn't going to come from political parties, this idea, right? There is an arms race for data of citizens within political parties. It has to be citizen outcry, or we are not going to see this very fundamental level of protection achieved. But I think that if there were ever a time, the time to push is now. So that's what I wanted to contribute to, one of the things I wanted to contribute to tonight's discussion. So that's me.
Well, I think I could be characterized as the person that was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'd like to offer my comments and answers to your questions from the perspective of being both in the trenches and subjected to just about every kind of voter suppression that I had been invented at that time, I think. And I also want to offer my kind of sort of accumulated observations over the last, where are we at now? 4, 5, 6 years later. As a geographer, I look at a lot of maps. And so if you go up to 20,000 feet and you look at the geopolitical landscape, I think the other thing that we all know is that these kinds of electoral frauds, voter suppression techniques, are a function of where we are in the geopolitical landscape, and especially in Saanich Gulf Islands. So if we want to look at the origin of, why was Saanich Gulf Islands the first hit in terms of voter suppression and electoral fraud, we just need to go up and look at 20,000 feet and realize, first of all, Saanich Gulf Islands was a long way away from Ottawa, probably the farthest away. And the second thing is that between the oil sands and the markets, there's this port, there's this place that the tankers have to get through. And Andrew Nikiforuk, one of Canada's most esteemed journalists, was very astute when he pointed to the role of petropolitics in corrupting, Canada's political system. And because of the nature of the people that were involved, the kind of the narrative of what happened in Saanich and Gulf Islands, I think it's the narrative that we all need to understand of what happens when you get a political force that really needs to maintain its ability to get its resources out, and this kind of electoral fraud seems to accompany, the petropolitic type of style. So I think I'd love to, field questions on that, sort of the larger questions of why Saanich and Gulf Islands was hit first, and then the implications. There was a lot of things that happened, or at least didn't happen in Saanich Gulf Islands. There was certainly a lot of affidavits filed. In fact, Sebastian was one of the people that filed those affidavits after the 2008 election. Why wasn't there any follow-up in Elections Canada? Will Horder, sitting here, he wrote a blog in 2010, said, "Watch out, Canada. No one's investigated. Elections Canada hasn't investigated. No one's followed up. The media haven't picked up on what happened in Saanich Gulf Islands. This was ground zero. Why didn't anybody follow up? Why was Canada not prepared for what happened in 2011? I think these are all really important questions, and I think that we've got the people in the audience that can answer them. I also want to talk personally, and if those of you are interested in the topic, but for me, voter suppression is a big, huge, long continuum between breaking the law and breaking the spirit of people that get involved in politics. And I would be happy to talk about, I'm sort of picking up the cues of Erwin Cutler, but the kinds of impacts that some of these voter suppression techniques have on the people that are in trying to make a difference in the political realm really have profound effects. And they are very much deterrents into getting involved. And also when we talk about apathy, we have to understand that apathy is the end game for people engaged in voter suppression. That is what you want. So one of my sort of observations is that this is a numbers game. To go back to the database, it is a numbers game. When you've got only 14 ridings that can make the difference between a majority and a minority position, there was only 14 ridings that needed to be won. And if you look at those ridings, it was only 6,000 votes that made the difference between a Conservative majority and a Conservative minority. So just in those 14 ridings alone, all you have to do is really understand that it's a numbers game. They knew how to deter the vote. They knew how to manipulate the people in those ridings to the extent that they could win that election. And I know that because from experience, there was such, when you look and do an analysis of the Saanich Gulf Islands election, it was very clear how to push the election and diversify the vote, which is what they were wanting in terms of the outcome, the divide and conquer outcome. So I'm just touching on topics, but I'd love to discuss them further.
Hi, thank you. So if Briony was giving the view from 20,000 feet, I'll maybe give it from 2 feet or one foot or 30 kilometers, as the case may be. Sorry? Oh, closer? Is that better? I was saying that if Briony was giving the view from 20,000 feet, I'll give the view from 1 foot. So there were a couple things that happened in the 2008 election in Saanich Gulf Islands that were weird. The first one, which probably relates most directly to the film, were these automated calls that went out. I think it was the day of the election, day before. I had to go back and read my stories from 6 years ago because my memory's not so good. Julian West had been the NDP candidate. He dropped out too late to have his name removed from the ballot, but he was no longer a candidate. The day of the election, or the day before, this phone call comes out to people encouraging them to vote for the NDP candidate. It appears to people like it's coming from the president of the NDP Riding Association's phone number. In the end, Julian West, who dropped out, got 3,700 votes. Briony lost to the Conservative Gary Lunn by 2,700. So less than the number that Julian got. Conservative people working in the riding, the Conservatives said it had nothing to do with them. Everyone denied knowing anything about it. They suggested that lots of people would have motivations for it. Maybe the NDP wanted to get back at the Liberals. Maybe they wanted the $1.50 that they get per voter. Maybe the Green Party did it. There were all these possibilities put out there. Elections Canada investigated, but I believe it got to the point where they said, well, we don't know that anybody actually was convinced to vote for the NDP because of this, and besides, we can't tell who placed the call, which was one of the reasons the later one was interesting to me, because they did manage to get the records, and it surprised me at the time that TELUS could not produce it, and it was not altogether clear that they made a full effort there. The other thing that was weird that happened was a thing with third-party advertisers. So there are limits to how much you can spend on a local election campaign. I think it was $92,000 that election. The Lunn campaign was close to that. I think Briony's campaign was probably close to that as well. 308 ridings in Canada. 59 third-party advertisers were registered across the country. 5 of them were in Saanich Gulf Islands, and actually in the end I think a couple more, because there were a couple of Oz supported Briony and there was another one as well, but 5 out of Saanich Gulf Islands, and they had names that people had never heard of before. They were the Citizens Against Higher Taxes, the Economic Advisory Council of Saanich, the Dean Park Advocacy Association, the Saanich Peninsula Citizens Council, and the Common Sense Advocacy of Victoria Group. Now, third-party advertising, the rules are mostly set up to address things like the Dogwood Initiative or Sierra Club, organizations that exist to push an issue. These groups emerged sort of out of nowhere. It turned out when they finally, third-party advertisers do have to register some information with Elections Canada. It turned out that 4 of them had the same financial agent, a guy named Mark Dickinson, who works for a marina up on the peninsula, or he runs it or owns it, I'm not exactly sure. 4 of them were registered out of the office of Bruce Halser. He was a lawyer who, at the time he was the vice president of the Saanich Gulf Islands Electoral District Association for the Conservatives. He'd worked on Gary Lunn's campaign. he was involved in the Conservatives in lots of ways and remains so. Last time I talked to him, he'd met with the Prime Minister the day before, and that was about 3 weeks ago. One of the groups, Citizens Against Higher Taxes, when they filed their expenses, they had one item, and it was Bing Giroux, Richmond Plastics, has signs, purchase. Now, Bing Giroux was Gary Lund's campaign manager as well. So anyway, the extent of all this is that basically $15,000 was spent through third-party advertisers. The Lund campaign was close to the limit. Altogether it put them well over. Anyway, it seemed a fairly straightforward thing, sort of obviously that there wasn't a whole lot of distance between these groups that emerged from nowhere and the Lund campaign. There were complaints made to Elections Canada. I think Sebastian's complaint brought it up, and there were at least 2 others. And it never went anywhere. I called them this week just to make sure that I hadn't missed something. They're like, oh no, you can say no charges were ever laid. They investigated and it never got to that point. So one of the things that I think I want to echo from the film is just that when there are no consequences, it leaves the door open to doing these kinds of things over and over, whether it's robocalls, whether it's the third-party advertising stuff, whether it's the in-and-out scandal from 2006. If Elections Canada doesn't have the teeth to follow through on any of it, it really does create a situation where people have no real reason not to engage in these things. They win elections, and it takes years to catch up. I think there was something in the news. One of the things at the 2008 election, there were finally charges just in the last day or two. Anyway, so there need to be consequences.
Okay, so the reason I'm here, I suppose, is that I have some of our research touches upon statistical methods to detect voter suppression. And yes, I did use those methods on the 2011 federal election, and I did find some evidence of reduced voter turnout in the affected ridings. And I'm very happy to talk about this if somebody in the audience asks me in the question period. But what I really want to stress, and that's the contribution I want to make here, is to take a little bit of a broader perspective, take a step back and think about the techniques and electoral strategies that undesirable or illegal electoral strategies that we heard about, both in the movie and the film and also from our panelists here, as symptoms of a disease rather than the disease itself. So rather than thinking about them in isolation, let's look at the forest, not the trees, and look at the electoral system that we have. My point as someone who has done extensive research in the area is that the electoral system we currently have, which is the first past the post system, encourages excessive competition. And that kind of excessive competition will manifest itself in these kind of strategies we're seeing. If you move away from first past the post towards more proportional representation, then the 6,000 votes don't matter anymore. And the numbers game really doesn't matter anymore. And the incentives for parties and political actors to engage in these kinds of illegal or undesirable practices, if you think about negative campaign advertising, defamation of your opponents, all of these things become less important if you move to a proportional representation system. Now, people might say, well, this is kind of utopic, this is, changing an electoral system and electoral reform is really something that is, in the clouds and we shouldn't even put effort in it. But I don't believe that because countries have changed. New Zealand did it in the early 90s. Australia had a period of electoral reform. And let's not forget that the origins of the system that Canada has are entirely due to a historical accident. Right? It's not that we ever chose the system. We have the way we're currently electing our MPs is a historical accident that is entirely driven by the fact that we were colonized by the British. And so we don't, you might have love, heart, warm feelings towards the system, but really it's not something that we ever chose and we said, well, this is what we want to have. It just happened to be the system that people adopted because that's what was, what they were used to, in a sense. Only the British, if you look at the world map today, only the countries that were ever colonized by the British have that system. And many of those countries have since saw the light, they've seen the light, and they have changed. No one, by the way, has ever changed back. So there's no country that ever changed from first past to post to from proportional representation to first past to post. So my contribution tonight, hopefully, and I'm welcoming questions on that too, is to invite you to sort of think about the broader picture and to plant this idea into your head that if we can move away from the system that we have, then many of the problems that we're currently discussing that can be addressed, of course, directly with direct legislation and direct rules and privacy rules and increased possibility for Elections Canada to enforcement, that many of these problems will go away by themselves. Okay. Thank you.
So there you have it. 4 great speakers, 4 different perspectives. Hopefully they've given you lots to think about and to stimulate our discussion. Now, in the audience, Mr. Peter Sandmark with the microphone will be the conduit between you and this panel. Folks online, you've got Twitter that you can use to ask questions. We've got a team here who can field questions, and when I get the signal from them, I will turn to them if they've got something they'd like to add. Before we get going, just a couple of basic ground rules. Please, let's be respectful, so no insults, okay? Let's be relevant, let's stay on the topic. There's a lot of important causes out there, and I'm sure a lot of us support them, but let's stay on the issue of electoral fraud. And if you can please bring forward information that's factual, that would be appreciated. We've got a lot of journalists in the room, and they'd remind us if stuff was hearsay. So let's, if you bring information, please make it factual and be able to back it up. Now, if anybody sort of starts getting off on a certain topic, I might have to bring it back. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah. All right, great stuff. Okay, so we are going to kick it off. I will say if you've got a question, please put your hand up, and Mr. Sandmark will come see you.
Hi, I have a question. Joan Thomas, my name, for Briony. And I live in Cadbury Bay. And when you didn't get elected, I couldn't vote for you because the electoral line had been moved. I live in Saanich, but not Saanich and the Gulf Islands because the line was moved. And I think you mentioned that, because you lost a lot of friends and votes on 10 Mile Point. That's what I remember you saying. So who moves the line? Who decides that?
Okay, I'm not an expert on the Elections Act and the movement of boundaries, but I can, as you saw from the film, electoral boundaries are very much an opportunity to manipulate the vote, and we're certainly seeing it as the boundaries are being redrawn now. So I'd say it sort of it harkens to the very kind of my point that I've been witnessing, which is voter suppression really takes on a whole gamut. As Anke suggests, once you've got a competition and you're gunning for the goal, whatever it takes to get your vote in is really what becomes the bottom line. And when you've got also the ability to amend the Elections Act or gut it, actually, as we've just seen, and you can start removing all the checks and balances and oversight, then you're really you're in trouble. I mean, we are in trouble, folks. Anke, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, so I'm not 100% sure on the statutes in Canada, but I do believe it is Election Canada who moves the line in Canada. But in the United States, which is also a first past the post, the Electoral Boundaries Commission, but is it part of electoral? No. Is it part of? It's a parliamentary, a multi-party commission. Okay, thank you for the correction. So I wasn't sure on the institutional details there. But in the U.S., this, which is also a first past the post system, this is a very common practice. It's called gerrymandering, and it's used extensively to get ahead in the competition. But again, changing electoral boundaries can get you, a few hundred votes, maybe a few thousand votes, and that only matters if you have a race that will tell you you only need a couple of more votes than your opponent. If you do not have that race, if it doesn't really matter whether you have 31% or 32% of the vote, which would be the case in a different electoral system, then redrawing boundaries and gerrymandering would not be an issue. Nobody would have an incentive to do that. And you do not observe this in countries that have proportional representation or a mixed system. I'm going to repeat myself many times tonight.
So just so you know how it's going to play out is you can ask questions of a specific panel member. You can also ask general questions. What do we do? What does this mean? And I'll turn to them, and whoever wants to take it will signal to me. We'll try and get one person to answer the question. If there's a burning follow-up, we'll go to them. And I think we've got another question from the audience.
Yes, my name is Stuart Herzog. I've had occasion to put a complaint into Elections Canada. And what struck me from the experience that I had is Elections Canada was pretty well completely incompetent at handling this complaint. It was astounding. The person who was handling the complaint couldn't even open a PDF. It was that bad. And what we're seeing this evening is a continued series of unsatisfactory investigations by Elections Canada. So I want to ask all the members of the panel, are you personally satisfied with the ability of Elections Canada to conduct investigations? And if you're not, how would you suggest that this situation be improved?
So a big question. Any volunteers?
Sorry, it's me again. Elections Canada itself is not satisfied with its ability to investigate these kind of illegal behaviors and conducts. So if you read Elections Canada, following the 2011 election and the robocall scandal, Elections Canada did issue a report on, I think they called it illegal communications with electors. And in those reports, there was about a dozen of recommendations, and among those recommendations was that Elections Canada, seeing that it was unable, because of its staff, but also because of its lack of mandate, to carry out a proper investigation, that it needed to have additional powers, and that there had to be rules in place for Elections Canada to better enforce the kind of regulations that are in place. So Elections Canada, I'm not sure you want to blame Elections Canada, because they really understood this was a first-time event, and they immediately understood that we're actually not able to handle that at all.
Okay, so you're suggesting that even Elections Canada feels that they don't have sufficient powers to do their work, okay? Andrew?
Yeah, my short answer would be no. I'm not really satisfied with how Elections Canada does the job, or I guess it's actually the Commissioner of Canada Elections at this point. They divided the responsibilities into two, and complaints are followed up by the Commissioner. Even the ones they follow through on, like the In-N-Out scandal, it happened in the 2006 election. It went through the court process and everything. The settlement happened in 2012. So 6 years later, 2 elections later, the time it takes is amazing. And then there are all the ones like yours that they don't deal with thoroughly. like the ones from Sandwich Gulf Islands in 2008, where it felt like they hit a roadblock and they stopped. So no. And they are a creature of the legislation that creates them, and they are a creature of the amount of funding they're given, which is decided by the politicians. So yeah, they're working under constraints, but for whatever reason, they don't get where they need to go.
Does anybody else want to add anything to that? No? Okay, that's enough. Okay. Okay, just want to put it out there that you can ask questions. You can also make comments in the audience. Okay, this is your night as well to share.
My name is Daniel, and I was curious if, Anke, if you could comment on the style of American politics and super PACs and advertising and the dynamic of the way that American politics works with respect to the first past the post system of voting. And because in Canada we often look at the States and say that, you know, we're kind of following, and people from America have come here and trained political people here in order how to win elections, but how the dynamic of Canadian elections is going in that direction. We're tending that way because that's kind of a fundamental property of the way that our elections work.
I mean, did I say I will repeat myself? This is the fundamental way. I'm being very, as a scholar, I should say that everything has, you know, I shouldn't be so clear and 100% sure of what the right and the wrong is. I think I'm painting it too black and white right now for the benefit of the audience. But this is the way that first past the post elections work. It's not the way that proportional representation usually works. So what we're seeing, and so first I do concur with you that we are going to, that not only are we seeing politics in Canada that are mirroring more and more what's happening in the States, but I'm convinced that this is going to go further. So we're going to follow that kind of path. That's evident in the voter databases that are being assembled, and it's evident in the negative campaigning and the way that the communication with electors work in Canada, which basically mirrors the United States. In fact, some of the companies that were hired by MPs to help them with the campaigning are originated in the United States. So those are U.S. companies. And, well, you know, yes, we're going to see more of that, definitely. And this is going to grow. The invasion of privacy is going to continue if we do not curb, if we do not enforce Privacy Acts on political parties. The party database is so precise in the United States. This is all money bought. So it's not that, you know, it's the money talks and money buys those databases, and they will know, the parties will know which kind of car you drive, how many kids you have, what your income is, whether you like golf or you prefer swimming, or you are an avid, reader of the New York Times, or or the Financial Post, or whatever you're doing. They know a lot of things about you that would leave you sleepless at night, and then they use these to contact you on very specific issues, completely manipulating your sense of what this election is about. But again, all of this is part of a strategy to win over just a few more votes, to get a few more people to vote. And that's what we call, excessive competition. It's a not just a waste of money and resources, it's also very undesirable practice that we can curb either by regulation or by moving away from the race. By trying to eliminate the big prize that's dangling by just getting a few more votes out there, right? So.
All right, thank you, Anke.
Maybe Micheal wants to.
Just quickly, I'll just quickly add when I say that advocating that federal parties be subject to privacy legislation, that doesn't mean it gets better, poofla. Kind of like the elections watchdogs we have, if you don't have privacy commissioners that have the mandate and the budget to have the resources to do the job, then what you've got is you've got token oversight as opposed to real oversight. And kind of like we say in our family when we jokingly say, are you a real blonde? You say, yes, absolutely, I'm a real blonde. Real blonde, that's what it said on the box, right? What it says on the box says oversight, but if you actually pull back the curtains, you see that desperately under-resourced, not adequately mandated to do what you think it needs to do. So if we have privacy legislation that is working on a kind of a moral suasion model, right, the commissioner will urge you to do the right thing as opposed to real penalties, real deterrence, some actual teeth in our independent watchdogs and oversight. Again, what we'll have is we'll have a reasonable facsimile of addressing the problem as opposed to really addressing the problem. So when I say we need privacy legislation, it comes with all of those provisos.
Thank you. So we've got a question from the back.
Hi. Thank you very much for that information about electoral reform, by the way. I had no idea. How do we get that ball rolling? What does that look like? What's the process?
We should talk about
we should rotate.
You're a politician.
You're a politician, Brian. Okay.
I kind of wanted, I just want to give a little bit of a reality check because I wear two hats. I've sat in the ivory towers, and I have no disrespect to well, you have too. You've sat in both. Those of us who sat in both the worlds realize that the leap from where we are to electoral reform is not an easy road. And I think the very difficult part of that road is that voter suppression has worked on the Canadian psyche. It has led to apathy. It has led to a great distaste. Even more than apathy, I think it's distaste. It's left a really sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, and it's driven them away. As I say, that is the end game for people trying to work at voter suppression. So what we have ahead of us is not just convincing people to get motivated to bring around electoral reform, and whether it's bring another referendum forward on pro-rep, but it's that, which is hugely time-consuming and involves vast amounts of energy, and is very. If you don't have a government that's advocating it, then it's got to come from the populace. But how do you do that when you've already got a lot of your social activists completely exhausted by all the other issues on the table? So my sense is that what we have to do now, and this is where I want to really turn the energy for you, because this is what I've come to the conclusion in my life. If you take the concept of voter suppression, it makes you feel kind of suppressed yourself. If you turn the conversation around and talk about voter engagement and start realizing how much power we do have, and start looking to some of the examples, even in Victoria, I think in Lisa Help's the current mayor, where there's a different kind of energy that happens when you change the language. And I think it's going to take all of us, in order to get these reforms in place, in order to get the government in place, in order to bring electoral reform, ultimately, because there's two steps before we get there, we've got to change the energy in the room. And I think that's really about the language we use. That's about really modeling a positive, supportive attitude and naming it. And I think the reason that I feel that this film is so important is that it names voter suppression and the creation of angst and bad taste around politics as a ploy, as the very end game. And that's what we've got to start talking about.
Okay, so we've got a follow-up to that.
Very well said. Well said. Let me add to this two things. Again, repetition. Voter turnout is, on average, about 10% higher in countries that use proportional representation or a mixture of the two. So it is true that the first past the post system is correlated negatively with voter turnout. Fewer people show up. There's more apathy in the system that we have than in other systems. I also want to point people to Fair Votes. I think it's called Fair Vote Canada. That is an NGO that is promoting electoral reform. And as usual, we all, you write your MP and tell them that that this is something you care about. And the one thing that's good about the current system, I don't want to be all black, is that there's a fair amount of accountability because people are directly tied to their districts. And so they have to watch for re-election, and the competition is good in the sense that it provides this accountability. So if you push the issue, your local MP will listen. That's my response to that.
Thank you. So, Andrew, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add that federally, provincially, we've had 2 referenda, and the feeling was that after the last one failed, it was sort of dead for 20 years. So there's some time to wait. Federally, the parties have different positions. Ask them what they are, and go to work for one that you agree with, and vote accordingly.
Great. So we've had a fair amount of talk. I know there's a question from the back we'll get to in a second, and I'd love to check in at some point with the social media folks as well and see if there are people in the other venues who have questions. But we've heard quite a bit about proportional representation. No. I want to build on that. And it's an issue that's pretty current. So if you're not comfortable doing this, please stay seated or don't participate. But show of hands in the room, who thinks that some form of proportional representation is something we should look at? Okay. Not necessarily tonight. Okay, so we'll be okay. So I do want to just So there's a lot of ideas coming out tonight, from voter engagement to looking at the legislation, perhaps our system as well. And just for the folks who are at home or not here tonight, I'd say that 90% of the audience had their hands up on that question. Okay, so I've got Peter, who's got somebody in the back, and then we've got somebody in the front here afterwards. Okay, Peter. We've got 2 back there, 1 here. Okay, great. So Peter, or whoever's back there, take it away.
Okay. Hi. Mine, I suppose, is more of an observation, but please feel welcome to react to it. It strikes me as somewhat ironic that a government which is ostensibly tough on crime seems to be able to skate so uncomfortably close to it that it is practically doing it itself, especially with the with stuff that we've just heard and seen tonight. Does anybody want to comment on, is this ironic? Is it just me, or is anybody else noticing this?
Thank you very much.
So, and I'll just say, if nobody on the panel wants to talk about it and somebody wants to respond in the audience, we can do that as well. Okay, so the tough on crime agenda.
Well, I do have one quick comment. What I have been following is to try and find actually the smoking gun for evidence that crimes have been committed. And this astonishes me, it continues to astonish me, because a story broke 2011, I think it was the Vancouver Observer. John Fryer, who was Professor Emeritus, won the Order of Canada for Labour Relations Policy, very esteemed member of society. He attended the Preston Manning Centre for Building Democracy, and at that workshop, which is funded by one of the funders is Gwyn Morgan, one of the board members, I believe. Gwyn Morgan, who was the gentleman that was implicated in the alleged funding of third-party advertising. So when you start connecting the dots, John Fryer made a statement to Ottawa Citizen that he was taught voter suppression methods at the Preston Manning Centre for Building Democracy. That story broke in the Vancouver Observer. There was another member that I interviewed. I don't know if he's sitting in the room today. and who also suggested that every time he heard techniques that sounded, you can go to the Focus magazine and get the exact wording he used. But these kinds of links between think tanks where you've got people very closely aligned, like Gwyn Morgan, to Stephen Harper, the teaching of voter suppression techniques, the links back to these three, like, is anybody else out there not aware of these close links to alleged crimes? And here is this, government that is hard on crime. Well, yes, I would love it if they would start turning the lens upon their own actions and doing a proper analysis of and an examination. So,
all right, thank you. So we've got somebody in the back.
I'm going to go back to a comment that was made a couple of points back about changing the energy around the dialogue or the conversation. And it's such a fine line to skate between giving information, informing people about what actually is going on, which is extremely depressing, and motivating people to look at it positively and find their way to not be depressed and work through something to create something positive. And I'm curious about your comment, particularly in the light of such things as a move to unfriend anybody who has an unpopular political opinion, and the world divide into who is receiving what information, including the big buyouts of our media. So they only represent one point of view. So who is it who's going to put out the information? Thank heavens there's a movie, right? A documentary. But where is the line between what depresses people but is necessary information?
I can try. I'll try. I'll try. I think my theory that is mine, if there is something that can be done, it's part of preserving the long form of public discourse. I find that the most kind of stomach-making for the fight thing that I do is talk to people, but not quickly. Because first you need the information, then you got to process it, then you got to decide what you're going to do, then you're going to find your allies, and then you're going to make a plan. It takes time. Wherever you can preserve the long form, if that's an entire evening to have a discussion, if that's an entire film on an important subject, if that's a long form article or I'm going to say it, a book, right? Yay for tweeting, yay for social media. It's a way to connect, but what we need to connect about is something that is longer than a tweet, right? We do. So that's a tool. We need to use it, but without the long form, we can't have the discussion that we need to build the information, to have the education, to not be naive, and then to move forward. So those are my thoughts.
Will, would you like to follow up on that?
Hi, I'm Will Horder. I'm the Executive Director of Dogwood Initiative. So one of the points I want to make, and I think has been made here, is that the solution to pollution is dilution. These problems only happen. It's ironic I say that because it's usually opposite what you're saying. But these tactics can only work when we don't vote. That's why it was very important that number 9 million people there. That's the number we got to change. The conservatives are banking on the fact that they're better at getting their people to the polls than we are. They start from a point of advantage, which is they have the best database on the continent. Their databases are better than the US databases. They know more about every person in Canada than the folks in the US know about every person in the US. We got more people than they do, but they're better organized than we are. So our task is, I want a question for the audience. How many of you actually, not only just voted, but how many of you actually got other people to vote on election day in the last election? How many of you did get out to vote work activities for a party or just did it on your own? Got your friends to do that? It's only about a third of the audience. The reason that they can win is because it's only about a third of the audience. It's up to us, folks. There's nobody else who's going to do this. It's not going to be the political parties. It's up to us to organize and make it a civic duty to vote and a civic duty in your community to make sure that everybody around you is voting. Now, that can't be done in isolation, so you need to hook up with something, whether it's a party that you believe in or an organization like Dogwood who has teams all over the place doing this kind of work. But it's not going to happen because of somebody else. It's going to happen because of us. Right? And we have to start somewhere. We have to demand that your political parties follow the direction of their constituents. And if they don't do that, then you get rid of them. Right? Switch parties. Might require new parties. But these things are not going to happen just because somebody thinks it's a good idea. It's going to be because it's going to be a fight. And every vote's going to count. And every person's going to count. And politics, as they said, it's just going to get worse. Because all the parties are going to micro-targeting now. And what micro-targeting means is gaming the system to get more of your people at any one moment in time to the polls than the other guy or the other gal. The only way to start with the quote, the only way to overcome that kind of thing is to change the system. And the only way to change the system is to organize outside of the party system and jam it down their throat. So I encourage all of you to find some mechanism to do that. We're trying to do that at Dogwood Initiative, but there's other organizations, Lead Now and other organizations out there that are trying to do the same thing.
Thank you, Will. Okay, so now we've got a question back there, then one here, and then I'm hoping we can hear a little bit from the social media folks and see what's going on online.
I'm Jocelyn, and I'll try to be brief. I want to say I voted for Briony in Saanich Gulf Islands in 2008 and was appalled by the result. I remembered the robocalls. I had forgotten the third-party advertising, the third-party involvement. I want to stay with what Briony is saying about changing the energy and about, I think there is a changing energy in this part of the world, and I think that, well, Elizabeth May deserves part of it. Briony certainly deserves part of the credit, and all of us need to work. Sorry, this is really important stuff. We need to get this film made, and for all of Canada to see it. We need to let people know that this stuff has a name and this is being used against us. So, bravo, let's just keep on doing this stuff and keep on being engaged and get more of our friends engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yeah. So we had a question. Are you sure? Yeah. You'll say something? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. My name's Sandy, and I was right there when Briony got ripped off, and all of us got ripped off too. And this kind of conversation is happening a lot in Victoria. A lot of people who we all know are very aware of these situations. What I want to know is, how do we reach the folks that aren't sitting here in Victoria? I know social media is one way. However, I'm seeing that Lead Now, thank you, Dogwood, thank you, all of the many organizations that are trying to find a way to unite us are still following their own paths, whereas this other This other united force is a united force. So we have several problems that we have to deal with. One is we don't have a united force. We all may be thinking about the same end, but we all have different tactics, and we're all confused about the proper way to go about it. Our goal is to change this government, because this government is a cancer, and it has changed our democracy, and we all want to do something about it, and we sign petitions, we get our friends out to vote, we do different things. I'm involved in the schools and in women in politics, but still, I still feel helpless, and that's not right. And so yes, I am finding myself around people who are changing the conversation and being more positive about it and looking at different ways. And I do want to be idealistic, but if anybody has any suggestions, I know the Vancouver Observer is now changed, is opening up a national observer, and they were getting some investigative journalists back in the East, so we can connect. I just think that we're a huge country, we're very diverse. What do we do to unify? If this were France, if this were Europe, people would be out on the streets all across the country. Why aren't we?
Okay, so I'm going to check in with our social media folks and see, do we have any questions right now that are being fielded? Peter, we've got a microphone over, yeah. Can we do it after? Okay, so we're going to go to that after, yeah.
Hi, some of these questions were actually intended for Peter, but I think just any answer would be appreciated. Many questions are variation on this theme, but what can we do? The question to Peter specifically was worded, Peter, what do you hope people will think and do differently as a result of watching your film? So what can we do? How do we reopen an investigation? How do we lobby Elections Canada, et cetera, et cetera?
So, Peter, do you want... So, there's a question for you, Peter. There's a question for you from the online sphere. Oh, great. So, Peter, what can we do about it? So you've got your film being made. What can we do about it? Come here.
Okay. Saanich Gulf Islands has already proven what you do about it. Okay? In 2008, you got caught. You got blindsided. When I was, oh, geez, you want me to eat this one? Anyway, I'm tired. I'm really tired. We're shooting night and day here. We're on a limited budget. I've got a great crew. Frank, my sound man, 70 years of age. He's still out here doing it. He was in John and Yoko's suite in Montreal all those years ago. He also was coming down the steps of the rotunda in the Parliament buildings on October 22nd when a gunman came in and shot a guard. He was standing at the top of the steps with the cameraman, and he got out okay, as you can see. So I've got great guys working with me. And these guys were not taking any money at first until I got some money raised and they started doing it because they believe in this. So what do you do? Voter suppression doesn't stand a chance when you vote. Simple. They never came back to Saanich, did they? Did they? Why? Because you guys mobilized, you learned, you let Elections Canada know even though they didn't answer you. In 2008, I got to tell you, what I learned yesterday from campaign managers we interviewed, from people who've been in elections since 1968 we interviewed. They'd never seen anything like it. Gary Lunn, the Minister of Natural Resources, was in a tidewater area, sleepy little county that is so needed and so key to the people in Ottawa. And when Briony Penn started coming up in the numbers, what did they do? They sent in the suits. These guys arrived about 8 or 10 days before Election Day. And I said this on the radio today, and I'm going to say it now. Things started to change dramatically. No gas tax. Remember those signs? All these things. They started changing dramatically. The suits slowly moved out all the people out of the campaign office of the Conservatives and took over. These are the black ops guys. These are the guys that get called in to do the dirty work. Okay? And you guys got blindsided. But good. You didn't know it was coming, you didn't see it coming, and you got nailed. And of course the left was a little bit broken up. You had the Green, you had the Liberal, and the way the left always is. You know, we like diversity. We want all kinds of different things, right? So we're gonna give everybody a chance, you know? Why not? This is Canada. Give everybody a goddamn chance. We deserve it. My parents were immigrants. My mother put me through school and bought a house on tips as a waitress. You could do that back then. You can't do that now. The bottom line is, before Sebastian, my spiritual warrior here, who has handled this for the last 2 months, and had to deal with me for the last 2 months of my insanity on this, you guys came out in 2011. You knew what you wanted to do. You were mobilized. And these guys didn't stand a chance. They didn't even bother coming back because they could see it. You were angry. You were upset. Let me tell you a quick story about Alan Raymond, who went to jail for 6 months in the United States, a Republican operative who rigged a vote or voter suppression in New Hampshire. And we're going to interview him in Washington for this thing when we get the money. He said he did the Democrats the biggest favor ever. What he did on election day in 2000, or was it 2004, I can't remember now, he arranged for all the parishes and the head campaign offices of the Democrats for the phone lines to be jammed, and headquarters. He says, I did the Democrats the biggest favor. They never saw it coming. Now they're so vigilant, there's no point of going in there anymore. So you guys did it. You've proven. In 2010, Horder wrote an article saying it's coming, and nobody listened. They're listening now. Trust me, they're listening now.
So I do want to recognize that it is a Wednesday night. Some of you have to go to work tomorrow. Okay, so we are going to be on final approach. I know we've got a question back there. I know Will had a follow-up to the last comment about being involved. A brief comment, and then we'll go back there.
Yeah, we were on the front lines in 2008 in Saanich Gulf Island, and we saw all those tricks. We were actually there when those black suits showed up. We've learned a lot since then, right? Not only Dogwood Initiative, but the other groups that are doing electoral work across Canada. And I would say it's not true that we're all operating separately. We're actually having some pretty serious conversations for the first time in Canadian history. And we've actually, in the process in British Columbia, kind of split up some turf, and people are going to be concentrated and taking the lead in different places. So again, all those people who didn't raise your hand of actually getting engaged on election day and the lead up to election, there's places for you to go if you want to go. The last thing I'd like to say is politics is very complicated in some ways, but it's also very simple. So there was a survey done a number of years ago of retiring MPs, and they asked them, what different kinds of techniques have an impact on you? And there's a very interesting quote that's essentially defined Dogwood Initiative's approach ever since I read it. It was by a retired MP, and I guess who it was. It was anonymous, but I think I know it was. Said, what people don't realize is there's only two kinds of people in the world. There's people who can hurt me in my own riding, and there's everybody else. So if you take that as your modus operandi, our job is to make sure that every elected official, whether it's federally, provincially, or locally, understands that we're going to hurt them. We're the or else. And that's not just going to happen. It's going to come because we take the lessons that we've learned over the years and we figure out how to engage and make them pay attention. Because unorganized people are powerless, and organized people have a lot of power. And that's our job. It's up to us to organize.
I just got a question for the panel in general. It was in the film they spoke about the In-N-Out scandal. I was I was just wondering, and how does that benefit the candidate?
Okay, so we've got a question about the in and out scandal. Briony, Will talked about organizing. Is there something you wanted to add to that? I saw you from the corner there.
Yeah, I wanted to say just briefly that just to reinforce the notion that what Saanich and the Gulf Islands started was something national. For example, Jamie Bigger was a young university student on the campaign. He watched the robocalls come in and the 10%ers take me out and the everything else that went on, the third-party advertising. He is the leader of Lead Now. That kid has got 350,000 people following him. So I want everyone to actually, in terms of turning the energy, I want to say thank you to everyone in this room because you probably all had a role in it, and we are changing Canada, and it doesn't take too much because they are so arrogant because we've been so asleep at the wheel, but we are no longer asleep at the wheel.
Okay, so we had a question about the in and out scandal and how they benefit from it. So is there somebody that would like to take that? So we've nominated Andrew to take this one.
I've been nominated, but I can't give you sort of a 30-second version. But essentially, it was to do with campaign spending limits. I would go home and Google in and out scandal. There's all kinds of information on the web. But it was a way around the spending limits, essentially.
Well, as a candidate, you can receive funding for your riding and also for the federal party. And you've got two limits, something like $1,001 per person for your riding, and then $1,001. I can't remember someone who's in the. But if you donate to the federal or you donate to the riding, but then you want to pump it through the federal, then you would pop it in your riding association bank account and then funnel it back to the federal so you could beef up one or the other. So if you had a riding that didn't need much money because it was a sleeper, you could take $40,000 out of that riding, pop it in the federal account, and then you would beef up your federal war chest.
And I guess we should add also that people were actually convicted for that. So there were some prosecutions and there were some fines. So they were found guilty for that. Out of court settlement. So a slap on the wrist is what you're saying. Okay. Yep. So what Andrew's bringing forth is that this was actually settled out of court. So they said, yes, we're guilty, we'll take this fine, and they walked away. Okay. Okay, so we've got one comment coming from the Twitter sphere, and then one in the audience, and then hopefully we can get a final word from our panel members.
There are still a few people left at the Mary Winspear Centre in Sydney, and one question that has come out of there for the panel is, what's the mechanism for Elizabeth May in a minority situation to make substantive change?
Somebody like to take that? So in a minority position, how do you make change?
You form coalitions. And okay, I really want to talk about this because I think this is really important. Coalition is not an extraordinarily bizarre idea. It's done everywhere in the world except here. And we have to form coalitions. And we had a coalition because that's the way we're going to get proportional rep. One of the big things that I think we all need to watch out for is that there is going to be a real attempt, and this is another form of voter suppression, to divide and conquer the progressive voices out there. I'm already seeing it. Every time I see an article by Vivian Krause, I know that they're out to rake up the muck and divide us. Those of us, whether you're green, orange, or red, or I can't remember what color they all are now, who cares? But whatever, they're going to try and divide and conquer the progressive side, to A, not form coalitions, and B, not cooperate in elections. So be very, very, very mindful that when you start seeing articles and you see names like Vivian Krause on these articles or any other people like that, they're out to make us fight within one another.
Okay, so form coalitions. Okay, so we've got there was somebody in the audience, lady in white, a question from the audience. Oh, pardon me, I'm throwing things at you. And then one more here, and yeah, so we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll have a final word from the panel members. Okay, great. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. I thank you so much for this conversation. I'm really curious about the kind of language we're using, and some of the comments, a few of them, like jam it down their throat and divide and conquer, and I love Briony's approach to turning the conversation. How do we take that violent language? It's like it's a way we're buying into the system, and we're participating in a mindset. So part of our power is to change that paradigm. So I just wanted to call that out.
Right. So thank you. We had another question from the audience.
I may make a comment? The way I see it, as a foreigner, as a newcomer here, I've been only 28 years here. Yes, I just want to say that in order to walk in any landscape, we have to understand that landscape. And the same with political landscape. I believe majority of us do not really understand the political landscape. Our problem is much bigger than the conservative cheatings and deceiving us. We have 3 federal parties that all of them are working to protect corporate interest against public interest. All of these things come to that. In election 2005, 2006, we see how they defeat the will of people by bringing phony accusation against corruption of, for example, Ralph Goodell. And RCMP, for the first time in the history of RCMP, intervened on behalf of conservative in that election. What I like to suggest is that if we agree that the corporations are the problem, for example, we don't have right to know what we are eating in this country. If I don't want to eat GMO, I don't have that right. They are telling us it's okay and I have to eat it. And all of the political parties support that. None of them. If we, for example, if we want to change to proportional representation, all it takes, one of the provincial party adopt it. As soon as one adopt and people see the result, the rest will follow. That's how we got our Medicare. One province adopt, the rest follow. The last thing I want to say, a warning. The next trick that they are going to use in next election is not going to be the same. In last 2-3 election in the provincial, they used the polling companies to deceive us. Watch out. The polls are going to come and show that the conservatives are very popular and trying to deceive us. Watch out for polling company deception in the next election.
Okay, thank you. So given that was a comment and we'd said 2 more questions, I think we have room for 1 more, and then we'll have a final word from our panelists.
You know, there is an elephant in this room, and I thank Briony for bringing up the word, and that word is coalition, because we're not going to get proportional representation unless there's a coalition between the anti-Harper political parties. But the anti-Harper political parties are still playing the same game amongst themselves that they can win unaided. And the NDP has said they will bring in proportional representation if they win for the next election. It's always going to be the next election. I say, to me, looking at this situation, unless there is a coalition between the NDP and the Liberal Party, there's going to be another Harper government. And we're going to have Harper governments and basically the introduction of fascist American policies and the degradation of democracy for the foreseeable future. Would you like to comment on that, please?
All right, thank you. So we'll, I think, transition from this comment into closing comments from our panel members. Okay, so brief notes on what you'd like to leave the audience. And Micheal, you've got double duty, so saying your final words and also speaking to this, if you feel comfortable, of a coalition and whether or not it's necessary. No, you'll pass on that. Do you want to take it, Anke? So we'll start with Anke to speak to that issue of coalitions, and then if you could pass the mic on and we'll do some final closing comments.
I actually kind of have the same sense. So I'm not as confident as Justin Trudeau or Thomas Mulcair that they will individually win the next election and will form the government by themselves. So I take the bets that we're going to see another conservative government because of the divide to vote strategy. Now, I'm not I might come across as a partisan, but I'm not really a partisan. To me, I have issues with the Conservative government, and I might have issues with a potential Liberal government and a potential Mulcair government. But what is true is that these, that I am advocating, as you heard, electoral reform, and you do need to tell your MP, the parties that they need to, because that is, that can only be achieved through cooperation and coalitions. So you do need to tell your MP, stop being partisan, think about the good of Canada, and do what is right to do. I came here 12 years ago, and I was amazed by the ability of Canadians to be compassionate and to care and to work for the common good. I have to say, coming from Europe, there's a lot of things about Canada that are wonderful, and you can be proud of your country. And so I do not despair. I do believe that people can make it happen and induce change in this country. But there is a true danger here. Thank you.
Andrew.
I think, I don't really want to address the question of politics a whole lot. I'm a reporter, and I see myself as, a step removed and observing more than giving advice or punditry on stuff. But I would say that a coalition after an election where there's a minority situation makes total sense. The kind of trading you'd get into if we had a system other than first past the post, which delivered coalitions all the time, that would be totally appropriate. It's the ahead of the election part that I think makes some people uncomfortable because the parties that aren't the Conservatives aren't all the same. The Liberals are different from the NDP, and they're different from the Greens, and they're different from the Bloc, of course. And I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable when you get into arguments for restricting people's choices. But anyway, I said I was going to stay away from that, and I didn't really, and I realized there are probably lots of people here who disagree. What I did want to say was that there was a question earlier about reporting that encourages cynicism, I guess, and sometimes I feel like that as a reporter. If we report on things like the robocalls, like what happened in Sandwich Gulf Islands in 2008, that it is really depressing. As a reporter, you do it anyway because you think, well, I'll do this, it'll become known, the authorities, in this case, the Commissioner of Canada Elections, will step in and make it all right. And when it doesn't happen, that's disappointing and it's frustrating. So you hope that people, turn that into, either it's anger or outrage, and they act from that, and you hope that they find. Lots of people have talked to the need to participate, the need to vote, the need to get on with it anyway. Because if you get depressed and you get cynical, then the other side does win, and I think that's where I'll leave it.
Briony.
Well, I think you know my opinion. I have the freedom, the wonderful privilege of being able to speak my mind. I really want to fix on those two 2 points, because to me, this is where all the energy flows and this is where I get excited. And I always check in. If I'm feeling excited about something, then I think someone else is. So it is about language. It is about turning it around and turning it in and talking about voter encouragement. I talk about this with my kids, and that's where I get them. They get excited. But the reason that they get excited is that they somehow it's been articulated what the problem is, and that it's not as big a problem as they had been led to believe. And I think this is the language that we need to say. So, for example, when I say it's a numbers game, it really is a numbers game. And it's not as big a problem affecting change as we're led to believe. And one little Sanajan Gulf Islands can have a big impact, and we can take that message, and I'm hoping Peter's going to take that message with all of our support to each one of these, like, take it to Guelph, take it to Winnipeg. There are communities like this everywhere. And I also want to just talk about this like queasy area between talking, like trying to not be partisan and not, not being kind of, trying to be Canadian. And then an issue which is really burning hard. We are faced, folks, with a major crisis, things like climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the muzzling of our scientists. What I've experienced was, in my mind, because we have legal affidavits, we've got witnesses, was the law was being broken for a basic civil right, which is the right to a fair election. So I'm going to name it. I feel that in this riding, laws were broken, so let's get it clear that this is criminal behavior. We've got testimonies from the courts. So let's be clear that there's laws that are being broken in front of our eyes, regulations that are removing our ability to provide oversight and teeth and budget. And then at that stage, let's talk to our elected representatives and say, it's just not enough to mess around with maybe after and before. Get together, folks, get together, and bring in proportional representation. Now.
All right, so the last... Can I use your mic? Yeah. All right, so Michael will have the last word for tonight, and then we'll turn it over to our anchor to close us off.
The last word will be very brief because I'm going to steal a quote from the late, great Molly Ivins and just remind you that you got to have fun while you're fighting for freedom because you don't always win. So we'll do that.
Thank you. All right. So we'll invite Mandy up here to say a few closing words.
Wow. That's hard to follow. Thank you so much to Sebastian, to Micheal, Briony, Andrew, and Anke for being here tonight and helping to really activate us, inform us, and engage us. So I think we all have our tasks ahead of us. And one thing before we wrap, I do have some speaker gifts that I want to give to all of you. That includes you. But before we do, I just want to find out, a question has come from Will Horter, to find out from Peter how much he needs to complete his film. Where's Peter? Because we want to spread the word. What's that? Okay, so Peter needs about $450,000. So we have our work cut out for him for helping to make this happen.
So another 200 would be.
The mathematician's correct. I don't know what I was thinking. So anyway, we do have some work to help him fund this film, get this film made before the election. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. One of the things that I want to let you know is that we have archived, this is all digital, so this whole conversation, the live conversation, the online engagement will all be archived. And next week we will be putting that up, and that will become a place where people can either watch and engage and continue to share what we're doing, as well as help Peter to fund the film. So watch out for that. And now I have some very heavy speaker gifts for our speakers for being here tonight from the Global Village Gifts. And I think that they must be made of marble. Maybe you could just pass those along. I think I need an assistant here because it's hard to even... So we thank you very much. Oh, sure. Thank you. So yes, Global Village Store is our sponsor, and we thank you very much for being here. And I'm sure the speakers will be here for another few minutes if you want to talk to them. And I think our other events have probably wrapped up by now. Any other last words from Twitter from the online space? Nope. I think it's been really engaged. We actually hit over 500,000 reach on Twitter tonight. Yeah. Let's do this, Canada. Let's do it. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you on April 15th. Oh. Yeah. The little pieces of... Oh, we've been tweeting it all night. Believe me. But that little piece of paper on your table is the Indiegogo link, and you can find it if you go to Open Cinema on Facebook. We'll see you April 14th. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you.